Long before the tyrant king ever walked this earth, another killer ruled the land you're standing on right now. Not the one from the movies, not the one on the lunchboxes and the t-shirts. No, this one came first, millions of years first. And here in America, in the same dust that later became Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, it hunted with a patience that would make your blood run cold. They found its bones in the Badlands, hundreds of them, some scarred, some broken and healed, some belonging to animals that clearly fought and lost and were eaten. We call it Allosaurus. Most people have never heard the name. And that, my friend, is the strange part. Stay with me, the land before the king. Let me take you back. Imagine a wide, flat country, cut through with slow rivers and dotted with shallow lakes that came and went with the seasons. Ferns as far as the eye could see, great trees rising like green towers, and a heat that pressed down on everything. Scientists gave this place a name. They call it the Morrison Formation. It is not a location you can drive to and see all at once. It is a layer of rock, buried and exposed across the American West, running under Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, New Mexico, and more. When geologists dig into it, they are not digging into a graveyard. They are digging into an entire lost world. How we walk over history without ever feeling it. There was a story older than the human race. The Morrison was crowded with life. Long-necked giants, the ones you probably picture when someone says the word dinosaur. Brachiosaurus, stretching up to strip leaves from the highest branches. Diplodocus, so long that its tail could crack like a whip. Stegosaurus, with those famous plates running down its spine and a set of spikes on its tail that could open a wound you would not walk away from. These were the great plant eaters, the cattle of that ancient world if you want to think of it that way. Enormous, slow, built like living freight trains. And where you have herds like that, my friend, you always have something waiting in the shadows. Nature does not build a buffet without inviting a guest. Now, most folks, when they think of a dinosaur predator, their mind jumps straight to one animal. That big head, those tiny arms, the roar from the movies. But that animal would not show up for another 80 million years. The distance in time between Allosaurus and Tyrannosaurus is greater than the distance between Tyrannosaurus and you, sitting there right now. Let that settle for a second. And now the face of the hunter. Let me describe him to you. Start with the length. An adult Allosaurus ran somewhere between 28 and 32 feet from the tip of the snout to the end of the tail. Picture a school bus. Now picture something alive that long, moving with purpose across open ground. Now the height. An Allosaurus stood about 10 to 16.5 feet. If you had been standing in that ancient valley, you would not have looked down at it. You would have looked up. And I promise you, everything in your body would have told you to run. The weight came in around 2 tons for a big one. Some of the largest may have pushed well beyond that. 2 tons of muscle and bone, built not for defense, not for grazing, but for one thing, killing. Look at the skull, long, narrow, lighter than you would expect for a predator this size. Along the top, above the eyes, it carried a pair of short ridges, like blunt horns. We're not entirely sure what those were for. Once you have seen an Allosaurus skull, you do not forget it. Now open that skull. The jaw of Allosaurus could open shockingly wide. Wider than a modern predator, its size has any business opening. Some scientists have measured a gape approaching 80, even 90 degrees. Think about that. Think about how far you can open your own mouth, and then imagine nearly doubling it. This animal could unhinge its face like a trap, and inside that trap, rows of teeth, curved, flattened from side to side, edged with fine serrations, like a steak knife. Not built to crush bone the way the later king's teeth were. No, these were built to slice, to carve, to open a wound and let gravity and blood loss do the rest. Here is what took the experts years to understand. That wide jaw and those slicing teeth were not a weakness. For a long time, people looked at that lighter skull and thought, well, this animal could not bite very hard. And they were right. Pound for pound, the bite force of Allosaurus was surprisingly weak for a predator its size. Weaker than a modern lion, closer to the bite of a leopard than to the crushing jaws you might expect from the ruler of a continent. And that confused everyone. How does the apex predator of an entire continent get by with a soft bite? Because Allosaurus was not using its jaw the way we assumed. It was not clamping down and holding on. It was using that head like a weapon all on its own. Scientists now believe this animal drove its upper jaw down into its prey like a hatchet, like an axe swung by the whole weight of the neck and body. Mouth open wide, head thrown forward and down, teeth raking through flesh in a single brutal stroke. It did not need a strong bite. It had a stronger idea. I want you to sit with the picture of that for a moment. But the real Allosaurus was not simple. It was specialized. It had a method. It had, if you can forgive the word, a technique. And technique, my friend, is what separates a scavenger from a butcher. The neck was strong and flexible, exactly the kind of neck you would need to swing a head like a pickaxe. The body was balanced perfectly over the hips, that long tail counterweighting the front, so the whole animal could pivot and strike without losing its footing. The hands that held you down. We all remember the joke. The great king of the dinosaurs, all that size, all that fury, and then those two little arms tucked up under the chin, too short to reach its own mouth. And somewhere along the way, that image bled into how we imagine all these predators. Allosaurus had arms that worked, not long arms. Nobody is telling you it could throw a punch, but strong arms, muscular, and at the end of each one, 3 fingers, and on the end of each finger, a claw. The scientists who study the bones can read the muscle attachments, the anchor points where tendon met bone, and what they read is power. The arms of Allosaurus could pull, could grip, could hold. Now let me tell you about a bone that changed how the experts saw all of this. A single shoulder blade, a scapula, pulled out of the Utah rock. When they examined it, they found something remarkable. The bone had been broken, cracked clean through at some point in the animal's life, and then it had healed. Think about what that means. This was not a fresh injury from the moment of death. This was old damage, which means the animal survived it. It broke its own shoulder, probably in the violence of a hunt, probably while wrestling something enormous that did not want to die. And then it lived. It went on. It hunted again with that old wound aching in its frame. But here is the question that should be forming in your mind right about now. What was it fighting that could break its bones? What was strong enough to crack the shoulder of a 2-ton apex predator and leave it limping for months? The answer is the food. The very animals it hunted were capable of killing it right back. And that changes this whole story from a tale of a monster picking off the weak into something far more like a war. A slow, grinding, brutal war between the great plant eaters and the hunter that stalked them. The war in the ferns. I want to tell you about a hole in a bone, because when scientists studied its shape, its size, the way the surrounding bone had reacted, that hole was the exact shape and size of a spike on a stegosaurus tail. Now think that through. A wound on one animal, that is not a hunting injury. That is a fight. 2 of these plated giants, going at each other over territory, over a mate, over who knows what, driving those tail spikes into each other's flesh. And it tells you just how dangerous that tail really was. If a stegosaurus could punch a clean hole through the bone of another stegosaurus, imagine what it could do to a predator's leg. We do not have to imagine, because they found the other half of the story too. There is an Allosaurus bone, part of the pelvis, the tailbone region, with a wound in it, a puncture. And when the experts measured that puncture and compared it to the spikes on a stegosaurus tail, the match was almost perfect. The size, the angle, the shape of the damage. This was a predator that had been run through by the tail of its prey, impaled, wounded so severely that the injury got infected, and the bone shows the signs of that infection festering. Now, let me widen the picture, because the Stegosaurus was not the only danger. Remember those long-necked giants, the sauropods. Some of them, like the ones roaming the Morrison, reached lengths of 70, 80, 90 feet, and weights measured not in tons, but in dozens of tons. An adult sauropod was, quite simply, too big to kill. A mountain of muscle with a tail that could sweep a predator off its feet like a man brushing crumbs off a table. So how does a 2-ton hunter deal with a 30-ton wall of flesh? The honest answer is carefully. And here is where that word from earlier comes back. Technique. An Allosaurus was almost certainly not charging headlong into a healthy adult sauropod. That is a good way to end up as a smear in the ferns. Instead, the evidence points to a smarter, colder strategy. Target the weak, the young, the old, the sick, the ones that had wandered too far from the herd. And when it did commit to a large animal, it used that hatchet head not to deliver one killing blow, but to open wounds, bleeding an animal out over minutes, over hours, wearing it down the way water wears down stone. Patience. You have to ask a question that changes everything. Did Allosaurus hunt alone? Or did it hunt in packs? The answer is not settled. And the 2 possibilities paint 2 completely different nightmares. I will lay them both out for you next. Alone or in numbers. Everything I have told you so far, the hatchet head, the hook claws, the patience. All of it describes one animal, one hunter working its terrible trade in the ferns. And that alone is enough to keep you up at night. But now, I have to complicate the picture. Because of that quarry in Utah, let me set the scene. In the rock of central Utah, there is a site called the Cleveland Lloyd Dinosaur Quarry. It is one of the strangest fossil sites ever found anywhere on Earth. Because when the diggers went into it, they did not find a balanced snapshot of an ancient ecosystem. They did not find mostly plant eaters, with a few predators mixed in, the way nature usually stocks the shelves. They found the opposite. Overwhelmingly, they found Allosaurus. More than 40 individuals of this one predator, packed into a single deposit, young and old, large and small, all together. Now, in a healthy living world, that should not happen. Think about the land today. For every lion, there are many, many zebras and wildebeest. For every wolf, many deer. Predators are rare because it takes a mountain of prey to feed even one hunter. So, when you find a place stuffed with predators and short on prey, something unusual happened there. And for over a century, scientists have argued about what? One idea is grim and simple: a death trap. Maybe it was a bog, a patch of thick, sucking mud. A plant eater gets stuck, bellowing in fear. The sound and the smell draw in the hunters. An Allosaurus wades in to claim the easy meal, and it gets stuck too. And its distress draws in another, and another. One by one, over years, over centuries, the trap keeps baiting itself, predator drawn in by predator, until the mud is full of them. If that is what happened, then it tells us nothing about whether they lived together. It only tells us they died together, each one alone, each one fooled by the same cruel trick. But there is another idea, and this one is the one that raises the hair on the back of your neck. What if they were together in life? What if Allosaurus did not hunt alone at all? What if it moved in groups, in packs, coordinating, cooperating, the way wolves do today? Picture it. You are a young sauropod, separated from the herd. You feel safe because you have been watching the tree line for one hunter, one shape, one set of eyes. That is the danger you have learned to fear. But the danger is not one, it is five, spread out, patient, moving to cut off your escape. One shows itself in front of you, and while your eyes are locked on that one, the others are already at your flanks, already behind you, and by the time you understand what is happening, there is nowhere left to run. That is a different kind of terror entirely. A single monster is a force of nature, but a monster that plans with others, that surrounds you, that thinks as a group, that is something closer to an army. I will be straight with you, the way an honest man should be. We do not know for certain which of these is true. The pack idea is fiercely debated. Some scientists point to those young and adult animals found together and say, look, that is a family group, that is cooperation. Others push back hard and say no, modern reptiles that gather often turn on each other. And there are even signs on some of these very bones that Allosaurus in hard times may have fed on its own kind. Yes, you heard me. There are Allosaurus bones bearing the tooth marks of other Allosaurus. Whether that was hunting or scavenging a body already dead, or something darker in a time of starvation, we cannot say for sure. But it means that even each other was not safe. Even their own kind was, in the end, just more meat when the hunger came. Sit with that for a second, because it strips away the last bit of romance. This was not a noble brotherhood of hunters. This was survival, raw and total. They may have hunted together. They may have turned on each other. The truth is probably that they did both, depending on the year, the drought, the emptiness in the belly. And is that so alien to us? We know what people are capable of when the world turns hard. We know that the same neighbors who help you raise a barn one year can become something else entirely when the crops fail and the children are hungry. Cooperation and cruelty have always lived in the same house. We just like to pretend they don't. So which was it? The lone butcher, patient and solitary, gambling its life on every hunt? Or the coordinated pack, surrounding its prey, thinking as one, and turning on its own when the ferns went dry? The answer, I suspect, is that it was all of these things. And that is exactly what made it the undisputed ruler of this land for millions of years. Not one strategy, every strategy, whatever the moment demanded, that is what was here. Long before the king, you know, on the ground you walk. And I have one more thing to show you before we close. Something about how this reign ended and about what it means that we found it at all. The invitation and the vanishing. Now let me take you back, because there is one last thing you need to understand. We have spent all this time on how Allosaurus lived, how it hunted, how it ruled. But every reign ends, and the end of this one holds a lesson colder than any claw. Here is the hard truth. Allosaurus did not fall to a bigger, meaner predator. Nothing hunted it into oblivion. There was no dramatic last battle, no rival that stormed the throne. What took Allosaurus down was slower, quieter, and far more final than any monster. The world simply changed. As the Jurassic period drew toward its close, the Morrison began to change. The rivers that fed those green valleys grew less reliable. The great herds shifted, thinned, and in time the whole cast of that ancient world gave way to new animals. Scientists still debate exactly why the curtain came down, exactly which pressures mattered most. But this much is clear. A hunter, no matter how perfect, no matter how patient, no matter how armed with hooks and blades, cannot outlast a world that stops feeding it. The most terrifying apex predator on the continent was undone not by fang, not by spike, but by a slow turning of forces it could not fight and could not outrun. The land that made it, in the end, unmade it. That is how power really ends. Not with a roar, with a silence and an empty plate, and a world that has quietly moved on without you. And into that emptiness, over the millions of years that followed, new hunters would rise to fill the space. Different shapes, different weapons, leading eventually to that famous king we started with. But that is a story for another day. Because right now, I want you to feel the strangeness of what we have done here. We have reached across 150 million years and reconstructed the life of an animal no human eye ever saw. We know how it bit. We know how it broke its shoulder and healed. We know the wound a Stegosaurus left in its hip. We know it may have hunted with others and may have turned on its own. All of that from bones in the American dirt. And in the last part of this story, I want to tell you what that really means. Not just for the Allosaurus, for you, for the ground under your feet, for the way you walk through the rest of this day and every day after. Stay with me. This is the part I have been waiting to tell you. What the bones remember. I want to leave you where we started, standing on the ground, that parking lot in Utah, that highway through Colorado, the dust on a rancher's boots in Wyoming. All of it sitting on top of the Morrison, on top of the bones, on top of the reign of an animal whose name most people will never learn. We called it terrifying, and it was. The hatchet head, the hook claws, the patience that could bleed a giant out drop by drop, the pack that could surround you, or the loner that gambled its life on every meal. Everything I have told you is true, dug from the rock, measured and studied and argued over by people who gave their lives to reading these stones. But somewhere along the way, I think you felt the story turn. Because the more we learned about this monster, the more familiar it became. The healed shoulder, the old wounds that ached and never fully mended, the body that kept a ledger of every hard thing it survived, the hunger that walked it toward danger morning after morning, because there was no other road, the strange truth that its own kind could be both its family and its end. None of that is alien. All of it is the oldest story there is. Living things, doing what they must, carrying their scars, walking toward the danger because the alternative is worse. This creature and you are not so different, separated by 150 million years and joined by the same simple arithmetic of survival. And here is the thing I've been holding back, the reason any of this matters. Allosaurus ruled a world it was certain would last forever. It was the perfect answer to its time and its place. Nothing could touch it. And then the rivers dried, the herds thinned, and all that perfection meant nothing at all. The most powerful thing on the continent was erased so completely that we forgot it even wore the crown. We gave the crown to somebody else. We put the wrong monster on the lunchbox. That is what the bones remember, and what the living so easily forget. Nothing on top stays on top. Not the greatest hunter the Jurassic ever built. And the ground you stand on has swallowed rulers before, and buried them so deep and so quiet that 150 million years later, we walk over their thrones without a flicker of recognition. Now you know. Now, when you cross that parking lot, some small part of you will feel what is underneath it. So let me ask you to do a few things before you go. If this story moved you, share it with 5 people. 5 people who still carry that wondering kid inside them, the way you do. Follow the channel so we can keep doing this together, day after day. And leave me a comment, an honest one. Not just that you were here. Tell me what this stirred up in you. Tell me what you want to walk into next. Another predator, another lost world, another creature the history books quietly forgot. I read them. I choose from them. The next story might be the one you name. The land keeps its secrets patiently. It is in no hurry. It has all the time there ever was, but every so often it lets one of us listen.